Sarah Martinez stood at the entrance of the Navy recruitment office, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the crisp uniform she had carefully assembled. At 28, she had spent years dreaming of serving her country, but life had taken her down a different path. Now, desperate for respect and belonging, she had made a decision that would change everything. The uniform fit perfectly, complete with the coveted SEAL Trident insignia she had purchased online. Sarah had studied everything about the Navy SEALs for months, memorizing their history, their training, their code. She knew the stories, the missions, the brotherhood that bound them together. In her mind, she deserved to wear that uniform, even if she had never earned it. Walking into the local veterans gathering at the community center, Sarah felt a surge of pride as heads turned. The older veterans nodded respectfully, and she basked in their acknowledgement. For the first time in years, she felt important, valued, like she belonged somewhere meaningful. "Thank you for your service," an elderly man said, shaking her hand firmly. Sarah's heart swelled with an emotion she had never experienced before. She began sharing carefully rehearsed stories of fictional deployments, describing the weight of responsibility and the bonds forged in combat. The audience hung on every word, but Sarah's newfound confidence led her to make increasingly bold claims. She started appearing at more events, giving speeches about her supposed SEAL experiences. Local newspapers began featuring her story, calling her a hero and inspiration to young women considering military service. The attention was intoxicating, and Sarah found herself trapped in a web of lies that grew more complex each day. The deception continued for months until one afternoon when Sarah was speaking at a high school assembly about military service. Unknown to her, someone in the audience had connections to actual military personnel. Within hours, reports of her claims had reached the right people, and serious questions began to emerge about her background. Military investigators quietly began looking into Sarah's claims, cross-referencing her stories with official records. What they found was troubling. No record of Sarah Martinez ever serving in any branch of the military, let alone the elite Navy SEALs. The evidence mounted quickly, and soon federal authorities had enough to act. The arrest came early one Tuesday morning. Sarah was at her apartment, preparing for another speaking engagement when FBI agents knocked on her door. The charges were serious: stolen valor, fraud, and impersonating a federal officer. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Sarah realized that her dream of belonging had become her worst nightmare. During the initial processing, Sarah maintained her innocence, insisting that there had been some terrible mistake. She refused to remove her uniform, clinging to the identity she had created for herself. The booking officers treated her with the professional courtesy they would show any suspect, but there was an underlying tension in the air. What none of them knew was that Sarah carried a secret that would soon turn this routine case into something much more complicated. Hidden beneath the sleeve of her fake uniform was a tattoo that told a very different story about her past, one that would catch the attention of someone with the authority to change everything. The detention facility was cold and unwelcoming as Sarah was processed through the system. She had been fingerprinted, photographed, and stripped of her fake uniform, now wearing standard orange jail attire. The other inmates looked at her with curiosity and suspicion, wondering what crime had landed this quiet woman in their midst. Sarah's public defender, a young lawyer named David Chen, reviewed her case with growing concern. The evidence against his client was overwhelming, and the charges carried serious federal penalties. During their first meeting, Sarah continued to insist on her innocence, though her story had begun to crumble under scrutiny. "Sarah, the evidence is clear," David explained patiently. "There's no record of you ever serving in the military. The Navy has confirmed that you were never a SEAL. We need to focus on building a defense that acknowledges what happened and works toward the best possible outcome." But Sarah remained defiant, retreating into herself as the reality of her situation began to sink in. She had lost everything: her job, her apartment, her reputation, and now her freedom. The lies that had once made her feel powerful now seemed like chains binding her to a fate she couldn't escape. Meanwhile, word of Sarah's case had spread through military channels. The story of a woman impersonating a Navy SEAL had captured media attention, sparking debates about stolen valor laws and the psychology behind such deceptions. Veterans groups expressed outrage, demanding the harshest possible punishment for someone who had dishonored their service. The preliminary hearings were a media circus. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps, eager to catch a glimpse of the woman who had fooled so many people for so long. Sarah's former colleagues and the veterans she had deceived felt betrayed and angry, some calling for her to receive the maximum sentence allowed by law. During one particularly difficult court session, Sarah broke down completely. The weight of her deception, the hatred directed toward her, and the prospect of years in federal prison overwhelmed her. She collapsed in tears, finally admitting to her lawyer that she had never served in the military, but insisting that her reasons were more complex than simple attention-seeking. It was during this vulnerable moment that Sarah made a decision that would prove crucial. She rolled up her sleeve to wipe her tears, revealing for the first time a tattoo that had been hidden beneath her clothing throughout the entire ordeal. The tattoo was small but distinctive, featuring symbols that most people wouldn't recognize or understand. David noticed the tattoo but didn't think much of it at first. However, something about the design nagged at him. He had seen similar markings before, though he couldn't quite place where. The symbols seemed military in nature, but they weren't from any branch of service he was familiar with. That evening, David researched the symbols online, trying to understand their significance. What he discovered sent chills down his spine. The tattoo wasn't random artwork or a personal design. It was a marking associated with classified military operations, the kind that most people would never know existed. The next morning, David urgently contacted the prosecutor's office requesting an immediate meeting. He explained that new evidence had come to light that could significantly impact the case. When pressed for details, David simply said that they needed to verify something about his client's background that might have been overlooked in the initial investigation. The prosecutor, Janet Williams, was initially skeptical of David's claims about new evidence. She had built a solid case against Sarah Martinez and was confident in securing a conviction. However, David's insistence and his description of the tattoo prompted her to dig deeper into Sarah's background. Janet ordered a more comprehensive investigation into Sarah's past, going beyond the standard military records check. What emerged was puzzling. While there was no record of Sarah serving in the Navy SEALs or any conventional military unit, there were gaps in her employment history that hadn't been properly examined during the initial investigation. The FBI agent assigned to the case, Special Agent Maria Rodriguez, began tracking down every lead. She discovered that Sarah had worked for various government contractors over the years, often in positions that required security clearances. More intriguingly, some of these jobs had been with companies that provided services to classified military operations. When Agent Rodriguez tried to access certain employment records, she hit walls of classification that required higher-level clearance to penetrate. This was unusual for what should have been a straightforward stolen valor case. The deeper she dug, the more questions arose about exactly what Sarah Martinez had been doing during those mysterious gaps in her employment history. Meanwhile, Sarah remained in detention, unaware that her tattoo had sparked a high-level investigation. She had become increasingly withdrawn, speaking only when necessary and spending most of her time reading in her cell. The other inmates had learned to leave her alone, sensing that she carried burdens they couldn't understand. David visited Sarah regularly, trying to prepare her for trial, while secretly hoping that his suspicions about her background would lead somewhere meaningful. During one visit, he carefully questioned Sarah about her tattoo, asking about its significance without revealing what he had discovered. Sarah's reaction was immediate and telling. Her entire demeanor changed, and for the first time since her arrest, she looked genuinely frightened. "Where did you learn about that?" she whispered, glancing around nervously as if someone might be listening. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." Before David could probe further, Sarah clammed up completely, refusing to say another word about the tattoo or her past. However, her reaction convinced David that his suspicions were correct. Sarah Martinez was more than just a delusional woman pretending to be a Navy SEAL. She was someone with genuine connections to classified military operations. Agent Rodriguez's investigation eventually reached a level that required notification of higher military authorities. The case file was forwarded to Pentagon security officials, who immediately recognized the significance of the tattoo symbols that David had reported. Within hours, orders came down to suspend all proceedings pending a security review. The sudden halt in prosecution puzzled everyone involved, except those with the highest security clearances. Judge Harrison, who was scheduled to preside over Sarah's trial, received a classified briefing that left him shaken. Whatever Sarah's real story was, it was clearly beyond the scope of a simple stolen valor case. The media, sensing something unusual was happening, began asking questions about the delays in prosecution. Official statements were vague, citing procedural issues and ongoing investigation. But veteran reporters who covered military affairs suspected there was more to the story. It was during this period of uncertainty that Admiral James Patterson, a decorated Navy officer with decades of experience in special operations, received a classified briefing about Sarah's case. The Admiral had been brought in specifically because of his expertise in covert operations and his familiarity with certain classified programs that most military personnel knew nothing about. Admiral James Patterson arrived at the detention facility on a gray Thursday morning, his presence causing an immediate stir among the staff. A three-star admiral didn't typically visit local jails, and his security detail made it clear this was no routine inspection. The admiral had spent the previous evening reviewing classified files that painted a very different picture of Sarah Martinez than the one presented in court. Sarah was brought to a secure conference room, still wearing her orange jumpsuit and wondering why her routine had been disrupted. When she saw the admiral waiting for her, her face went pale. She recognized the insignia immediately and understood that her carefully guarded secrets were about to be exposed. "Ms. Martinez," Admiral Patterson said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Or should I say, Agent Martinez? I think it's time we had a conversation about your real background." Sarah's hands trembled as she sat down across from him. For months, she had lived with the knowledge that her deception about being a Navy SEAL was destroying her life, but she had never been able to reveal the truth about what she really was. The classified nature of her actual work had trapped her in a web of lies she couldn't escape. The Admiral opened a thick file folder, revealing documents that Sarah hadn't seen in years. According to these records, you served with distinction in several classified operations between 2015 and 2020. Your work with the Defense Intelligence Agency was exemplary, and your cover assignments took you into some of the most dangerous situations our country has faced. Sarah finally found her voice, though it was barely above a whisper. "Sir, I was told that information could never be revealed. My entire life depended on maintaining my cover identity even after my service ended. When I started pretending to be a SEAL, I thought it was better than revealing what I actually did." The Admiral nodded slowly, understanding the impossible position Sarah had found herself in. "Agent Martinez, your real service record is classified at the highest levels. The missions you completed saved countless lives, but the nature of that work meant you could never receive public recognition. However, that doesn't excuse impersonating a Navy SEAL." Sarah broke down then, years of bottled-up emotions finally spilling out. "I just wanted to belong somewhere, sir. After my service ended, I was lost. I couldn't talk about what I'd really done, couldn't connect with other veterans because my experiences were so different. The SEAL identity gave me something I could share, people who would respect what they thought I'd accomplished." Admiral Patterson studied the woman across from him, seeing not the fraud that the media had portrayed, but a damaged veteran struggling with the isolation that came with classified service. Her real military record showed courage, sacrifice, and dedication that far exceeded what most people would ever understand. "The tattoo on your arm," the Admiral continued, "identifies you as a member of a unit that officially doesn't exist. The symbols represent operations in 3 different countries, missions that prevented terrorist attacks and saved diplomatic personnel. You earned those marks through service that most people can't even imagine." The room fell silent as the weight of Sarah's true story settled between them. She had been a genuine hero, working in shadows to protect her country, but the classified nature of her service had left her unable to process her experiences or find community with other veterans. Admiral Patterson closed the file and leaned back in his chair. "Sarah, what you did by impersonating a SEAL was wrong, and there will be consequences. But your real service record changes everything about how this case needs to be handled. The question now is how we move forward in a way that acknowledges both your genuine service and your recent mistakes." Sarah looked up at him with hope for the first time in months. "What happens now, sir?" The Admiral stood, his expression thoughtful. Now we work on finding a solution that serves justice while protecting national security interests. Your case has attracted too much attention to simply disappear. But there are ways to handle this that honor your real service while addressing the harm you've caused. Following Admiral Patterson's visit, Sarah's case underwent a dramatic transformation that puzzled everyone not privy to classified information. The prosecutor, Janet Williams, received new instructions from federal authorities that completely changed the trajectory of the prosecution. While the charges against Sarah couldn't be simply dropped due to public attention, the government was now interested in negotiating a resolution that served multiple interests. David Chen found himself in the unusual position of representing a client whose real background he still couldn't fully understand. Admiral Patterson had met with him privately, explaining in general terms that Sarah's actual military service was classified but significant. The Admiral made it clear that while Sarah's impersonation of a Navy SEAL was inexcusable, her genuine service record warranted special consideration. Sarah was transferred to a federal facility with enhanced security protocols, officially for her own protection, but actually to prevent any unauthorized disclosure of classified information. The move sparked media speculation about the true nature of her case, with some reporters beginning to question whether there was more to Sarah Martinez than initially appeared. During this period, Admiral Patterson worked behind the scenes to develop a resolution that would address multiple concerns. The military needed to maintain the integrity of stolen valor prosecutions while protecting classified operations. Sarah needed to face consequences for her actions while receiving recognition for her actual service. The public needed to see justice served while understanding that national security sometimes requires compromise. The breakthrough came when Admiral Patterson proposed a unique resolution to the case. Sarah would plead guilty to a reduced charge of misrepresentation, rather than the more serious stolen valor violations. In exchange, she would serve her sentence in a military facility where she could receive appropriate treatment for the psychological issues that had led to her deception. More importantly, Admiral Patterson arranged for Sarah to participate in a classified program designed to help veterans of covert operations transition back to civilian life. The program, which officially didn't exist, provided counseling, career assistance, and community support for individuals whose service couldn't be publicly acknowledged. Sarah's reaction to this proposal was complex. She felt relief that her real service would finally be recognized, even if only by a select few. However, she also struggled with guilt over the harm she had caused to the reputation of actual Navy SEALs and the veterans community she had deceived. "I want to make this right," Sarah told Admiral Patterson during one of their meetings. "I know I can't undo the damage I've caused, but I want to find a way to serve again, to contribute something positive instead of just taking." The Admiral saw an opportunity in Sarah's desire for redemption. "There are ways you can contribute, Sarah. Your linguistic skills and cultural knowledge from your classified service are still valuable. There are positions within the intelligence community where someone with your background and hard-learned lessons about integrity could make a real difference." The media coverage of Sarah's case began to shift as information about a plea agreement leaked to reporters. While the specific details remained classified, it became clear that there were aspects of Sarah's background that had influenced the government's handling of her case. Veteran advocacy groups, initially outraged by her deception, began calling for understanding and support for veterans struggling with unacknowledged service. Admiral Patterson also worked to address the broader issues that Sarah's case had highlighted. He initiated discussions about creating better support systems for veterans of classified operations, recognizing that the isolation and inability to share their experiences left many vulnerable to the kind of destructive behavior Sarah had exhibited. The final piece of the resolution involved Sarah making amends to the veteran community she had deceived. While she couldn't reveal the details of her actual service, she could acknowledge her deception and work to repair the damage through community service and advocacy for veteran mental health programs. 6 months after Admiral Patterson's intervention, Sarah Martinez stood before Judge Harrison for her sentencing hearing. The courtroom was packed with media, veterans, and curious onlookers who had followed the case's unusual progression. Sarah wore a simple civilian suit, her demeanor calm but respectful as she prepared to face the consequences of her actions. The plea agreement had been carefully crafted to satisfy multiple interests while protecting classified information. Sarah would serve 18 months in a federal facility, followed by 2 years of supervised community service specifically focused on veteran support programs. The sentence was lighter than many expected, leading to speculation about factors not disclosed to the public. During the hearing, Admiral Patterson provided a sealed statement to the court that Judge Harrison reviewed privately. While the Admiral couldn't reveal specifics about Sarah's classified service, his presence in the classified briefing he provided spoke volumes about the complexity of the case. The judge's comments during sentencing reflected his understanding that there were aspects of Sarah's background that warranted consideration. "Ms. Martinez," Judge Harrison said, "your actions in impersonating a Navy SEAL were serious and harmful to the veteran community. However, this court has been made aware of circumstances regarding your background that, while not excusing your behavior, provide context for understanding the path that led you here." Sarah rose to address the court, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "Your Honor, I want to express my deepest apologies to every veteran I deceived and to every Navy SEAL whose honor I dishonored through my actions. There is no excuse for what I did, and I accept full responsibility for my choices," she continued, carefully avoiding any reference to her classified service, while acknowledging the psychological struggles that had contributed to her deception. "I hope that through my sentence and future service, I can begin to make amends for the harm I caused and contribute positively to the veteran community I wronged." The veteran community's response to Sarah's sentencing was mixed but generally more understanding than expected. Admiral Patterson had quietly reached out to veteran leadership, explaining in general terms that Sarah's case was more complex than it appeared. While many veterans remained angry about her deception, others began advocating for better support systems for all veterans struggling with their transition to civilian life. Sarah began serving her sentence at a federal facility that specialized in cases involving individuals with security clearances. The environment was more structured than a typical prison, with programs designed to address the unique challenges faced by former intelligence personnel. For the first time since her arrest, Sarah felt like she was in a place where people understood the complexities of her situation. During her incarceration, Sarah participated in counseling programs and began working on a classified debriefing process that allowed her to finally process her experiences from her covert service. The therapeutic work helped her understand how her unacknowledged trauma had contributed to her need for recognition and belonging that ultimately led to her deception. Admiral Patterson visited Sarah regularly during her sentence, serving as both a mentor and advocate for her rehabilitation. He had seen too many veterans of classified operations struggle with similar issues, and was determined to ensure that Sarah's case led to improvements in how the military supported personnel transitioning from covert roles. When Sarah was released from federal custody, she began her community service working with a veteran support organization that Admiral Patterson had helped establish. The program specifically focused on helping veterans who couldn't discuss their service due to classification issues. Sarah's role involved peer counseling and advocacy work, allowing her to use her experience to help other veterans avoid similar destructive paths. 3 years after her arrest, Sarah had become a respected advocate for veteran mental health and support programs. While she could never publicly discuss her real military service, her work with veterans struggling with unacknowledged trauma had given her life new purpose and meaning. Admiral Patterson often noted that Sarah's case had led to significant improvements in support systems for veterans of classified operations. The public never learned the full truth about Sarah Martinez's background, but her story became a catalyst for important conversations about veteran support, the challenges of classified service, and the need for understanding rather than simply punishment when veterans make destructive choices. In the end, Sarah had found the belonging and purpose she had always sought, not through deception, but through genuine service to others who shared her struggles.